Coming up on episode 93 of the Behind the Back podcast, we finally get to talk about the NBA Finals and how it finished. The Oklahoma City Thunder are your champions. We talk about that. We talk about the Tyrese Haliburton injury and what that means for the rest of the league moving forward and how this caused all this crazy trades that happened around the league. So we break down all those trades, and then we also turn our attention to the NBA draft. The Kings made picks. They got into the first round, ended up with Nique Clifford in that first round. We talk about both of our picks, Nique Clifford and Maxime Raynaud, and what that means for the Kings and maybe what the direction of the franchise looks now that we got these two guys on board. All right, y'all, with that being said, let's get it. All right. Welcome back to another episode of the Behind the Back podcast. We are your hosts. I am Marcos Conan Negron, and beside me here, as always, is Ben, the Jet Reds. Ben, the NBA draft just concluded, at least for the picks that matter to us. How are you feeling? Did you have a good weekend? How you been? How you been?
Yeah, man, weekend was good. It was, I went to Tahoe, had a good time. Unfortunately, I was caught in the car watching the game on the way home, the game 7 of the finals. But hey, we rallied, we found a way, and it was a good weekend. But I should be asking you, since you got the birthday coming up, birthday boy. Are you excited?
Yes.
What are you doing?
Very excited. It's going to be kind of a mellow weekend. The in-laws are out of town, so we're going to go over back to their crib and Yuba, take care of some things for them. They asked us to do that. But tomorrow night, the wifey and I are going to try a sushi place that's nearby. So we're going to have some fun there. And then the actual birthday, we're debating on either going on a hike or something like that. It depends on when we wake up, really. But,
Fire.
It's gonna be mellow, but it'll be nice. We got a lot of stuff coming up anyway, so, no big deal.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so for all you guys who heard our intro, we got a lot of stuff to talk about today. If you guys, first time listener, thank you guys for tuning in. Welcome to the Behind the Back podcast. We really appreciate all the love and support that we've gotten so far. If you guys like what we talk about, please give us a like and subscribe. That'd be really great. Tell all your friends and leave any comments for any questionable takes or opinions that we may have on this pod, because there's going to be a lot of them flying around. So it's been, what has it been now? Almost 5 days since the NBA Finals has concluded on Sunday. And what a whirlwind it was to get to that point. The last time we recorded, it was before Game 6, and we had kind of, we did it again already, just assumed like, OKC's walking away with this one. We were nervous about Haliburton and, how he was going to look in Game 6, and the Pacers and him looked pretty good and got the job done at home. Sent it to Game 7, and we just spent 3 days just like the build up, the drama. Everyone was talking about it. They were really excited. Game 7 happened, and Game 7 to me really felt like a tale of literally like two separate games. The game at the very beginning for the first 5.5 minutes, and then a whole new game once the Tyrese Haliburton injury happened. And for, obviously we're just going to rehash it because it's been talked about already all week and we're a little late to the party on it, but it's just too important. The Haliburton injury, he tore his Achilles, and, this was always a possibility, right? Like it was discussed, the debate on whether or not he should have played even in Game 6, all of that. What was in that moment? Because I want to talk about just kind of like I guess, you were watching it in the car, but, how it felt on the screen, what your initial thought was in the moment when you saw that happen.
Well, I was in the car with Cheddar, Chad, and some of the boys, and I was just kind of, holding the phone out there for me and the boys in the back seat. And I remember, the play happened super quick, and I see Tyrese at the deck, and obviously there's a fast break in the different direction. And then I hear, Tyrese is still down on the court. He's hurt. And they pan over to him, and you just see like how upset he is. And I'm like, oh crap. Like this is the injury that we were afraid of. And instantly, like, just like from a Niners fan perspective, I had some flashbacks. Big games, biggest games, and you lose your star players. It's really hard as a fan. So I felt instantly for Pacers fans, but at the same time, I was absolutely gutted for Tyrese because, everybody kind of rooted against him in a lot of ways, and were calling him overrated and saying he's this thing or that thing, and not necessarily giving him the flowers he deserved. I came on here a few weeks ago and said he was playing like one of the best players in the playoffs, right? But that was the only flowers I wanted to give him or the team. When he went down, it really did hit me at that moment, like how much he means to that Pacers team and just how much he cares about that city and about that team and about playing in that moment. Like, he actually put his entire body on the line, and he's not the first player to do that, but it really goes to show like what that kid's heart is. And it, you see it right in the front there. And it was tough. I was gutted. And the rest of the way, I was pulling for Indiana, but unfortunately, they couldn't pull it off.
I think, the craziest part to me was just that feeling. Like when I was watching it on TV, I just felt the sensation once he went down and they were just showing him on the camera and everything. The sensation around the arena, it almost felt like the entire Oklahoma City fan base felt guilt. Like they're like, oh, like I can't believe this is happening right now. Not this game. We wanted the best game possible. We thought we were getting what we were going to get in game 6. Tyrese was literally, he was on a heater. He had hit 2 threes and, looking confident, hitting 30 footers, and he was hyped up. And it was really shortly after that he goes down, and it's just everyone felt it. Shea went up to him, and he went up to him after in the locker room too. We got some cool videos on that, and that was good for them. But
it was awesome.
It was just, it's so tough to have to watch it, and I can only imagine, him in that moment. You could just tell because you almost had that sense that everything was going the way he was hoping for to start, and then it's over. And now it wasn't just for game 7. It's probably for all of next year too. And we're going to get a little bit deeper into what this Haliburton injury meant for the league because of that injury, a lot of things took place. A lot of people, a lot of teams reacted to it. So we'll definitely break that down a little more. But I thought Indiana did a great job because in that game, they were up at halftime 43-42. They kept their resolve. It's hard to watch your superstar go down, your heartbeat of your team. You had this whole plan. Game 6 went perfectly fine, and you're like, oh, this is going to be good. We can make it one more game, 48 minutes. And it was so disheartening. And I don't want to, and like, we're talking about this first because it's a shame that it almost feels like no matter how we view this finals, it's always going to be viewed as the game 7 Haliburton injury versus OKC claiming their first finals. And we'll get to OKC in a second, but it's almost impossible not to feel some type of way about that injury. So it was tough. It was disappointing.
Yeah, and you never want to look back at what was really one of the most electric finals in a number of years and think of it as, the injury game, the Haliburton injury game. It sucks that we have to do that, but it is a reality of the situation. And another reality of the situation is during game 6, everybody wrote Indiana off in that series. They said it was over. Tyrese comes out with his bum leg and they find a way to get that job done, right? And they find a way to extend that series. And that, to me, is like something that should really stand out and be really a building block for that organization, is just how gritty and how determined that team is and was and continues to be. This group that they've got there is a heart-filled group. And obviously you have a ton of questions with their future moving forward, going into next year in the short term. But it's, what they were able to build in really a pretty short time in Indiana has been extremely special. And that's something that, if I can provide any solace to Pacers fans, I would tell you, like, you could be in a lot worse situations right now. And I know it's hard to feel like that. Coming off of a finals loss, I can tell you firsthand, I've experienced a number of Super Bowl losses. The last thing you want to hear is that it could be worse, but the reality is it could be worse. I think the Pacers have what it takes to get back to the finals. It may not be next year. Say what you want. I might be writing them off right now. But I do think like Haliburton will find himself back in the finals at some point in his career, and hopefully then it's a time that he can get the job done.
Yeah, I hope the best for him. And he got surgery very shortly after, and everything's going well. So now he's just recovering. But the question becomes moving forward in the NBA. It's all about the Achilles injuries now, and they're really starting to do the research on it. There was a report that came out that there was a total of 8 Achilles injuries this year, I believe, is what it was, and that resulted in the season-ending injuries for guys. And last year there was none. So this was a kind of a turning point for the league, that all of a sudden this attention, you're getting Jason Tatum, Damian Lillard. Damian Lillard's a little bit different because he is older, and that's something that you would have anticipated. But Jason Tatum, 27 years old, Tyrese Haliburton, 26 years old. These guys should not be tearing their hamstrings.
No.
And it's a testament to how much the game has changed, how athletic the game has become, and just how much is needed. And it just goes to show now that when we review a calf strain, when people talk about a player with a calf strain, it's the question is, how serious is it? And now I think people will start questioning it less, in the sense of, oh, he has a calf strain, he's probably going to be out like 2 weeks or so before we get things right. So it's a bummer, but and I thought, again, they held their own. I thought McConnell, I honestly thought, had they somehow pulled it off, I honestly thought TJ McConnell was going to be the MVP of the series for the Pacers. I thought, with all the games he had in the series where he, in a single quarter, had a 12, 13-point outburst and just kept them in it, I thought, he, in Game 7, he obviously played like he was the only point guard available for the team. So it was a little bit sped up, a little bit rushed, but he had a moment in there where he kept them in it. And, TJ McConnell and Benedict Mathurin, the Arizona boys, did a good job holding it down. It was tough. It's a tough spot to be in, but you lose your star player, and the teams on the other side had to take care of business. The Oklahoma City Thunder were the better team, and they really needed to find a way to rally. I think it's a mentally challenging thing for the other team too, watching the other team's star player go down the way that he did, because you could see the respect that the Thunder had for Tyrese when he went down. They checked on him, and I think there's a level of guilt that they had too. They're like, okay, we can't let this get in the way, as crappy as this feels.
That was what the entire rest of that first half was. It was a guilt feeling. And then when the break happens, no, I mean, I'm being serious too.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
When that break happened at halftime, both teams came back out essentially with we got to put this behind us. And that, that went for both sides, Indiana and OKC. And once that kind of got put behind both teams, obviously you saw the better team at that point pull ahead. But that, yeah, dude, that, quarter and some change that, Hallie, was out, it was a little weird, and the vibe in just the game itself was a little off, and you sensed that. And obviously, it kind of benefited the Pacers in that regard, because they had that 1-point lead going into half. But yeah, that rally coming out of the coming out of the halftime break that OKC went on, I mean, they really came out and played like, they were the ones who would have to lose this game. Otherwise, they need to just go out and play their game, and they would get it done. And I think OKC, we'll pivot now and talk about them. OKC has done an exceptional job all year long. I've been gassing them up all playoffs. They were my pick going into the playoffs to win it all. I think they've done an exceptional job sticking to their game plans and trusting that, what they've got and who they've got will be able to, win them games more often than not. And that's exactly, what happened in throughout the playoffs. And you can say that their road, was muddled with injuries. You can say the same about the Pacers as well. You can say the same about a number of teams, a number of years. I mean, we're now getting to a point where injuries are more and more common, because you're more and more athletic and the game is more and more asking of you physically, right? You're getting to a point where availability is the best ability. And that best ability is going to more than likely win you a championship if you already got a damn good roster. And we're starting to really see that kind of come into effect now. And that was something that stood out to me. OKC did an exceptional job staying relatively healthy all year long. Obviously, the big loss to Chet for a number of games. I think it was like 20 plus. I don't know, right around there.
Yeah, it was a solid couple months there.
It was a good couple months. And they rallied really well. The boys held it together. They stayed very competitive. And from there, really stayed healthy the rest of the season. And then in the playoffs, more of the same. So there's blueprints that have really been established here. And one of those blueprints is what OKC has been able to do from a physical standpoint of sticking to their game plan, staying healthy, and really, this is one of the youngest, if not the youngest teams in the league. And they were able to really establish a vet mentality throughout this playoffs that, a lot of teams, even with veteran experience, can't really find sometimes. And that to me stood out.
Absolutely. I think the difference for this team was really, obviously SGA played exceptionally well. I thought with the fact that it was, Lou Dort and Alex Caruso, they really stepped up in that game 7. And I think that just shows, listen, Caruso's been there, done that. He's won a title with LeBron. And Lou Dort is that kind of physical presence that was, especially without Tyrese, able to shut down anybody else on that Pacers team. So that whole team did a good job just showing why they were the number one defense and finally seemed to just say, hey, this is what we were good at all year. And you kind of figured us out. Now that Tyrese is here, we get to suffocate. And I do think that OKC they did everything that they were supposed to do and didn't lose sight of the goal despite everything. And, a historic season, and a lot of it's going to be marred by how close this series was. I think if they had won like 5-1, we'd be talking about OKC as a much more dominant team. But this was an awesome series, and that was something that we had talked about. Like I had faith that the Pacers would be able to make this competitive, and it took it to 7. And you get for Indy, you get the worst possible outcome. OKC, you get the outcome you were hoping for. And that's just the risk you take. But for OKC, they're set up for a long time. They probably don't have to make a single move to the roster this offseason. And, they're really well positioned, at least for the next 2 to 3 years. It's easy to say, like 5-8 year window in the NBA, but with the way the CBA is and the money and everything like that, it's going to be hard to say, hey, we're going to be paying Chet, SGA, and Chet a total of $500 million combined between the three of them and say, we're totally going to be fine. But they have this window right now with a bunch of dudes on rookie scale contracts. Let's make it go. They have a good as a chance as anybody to win the title next year.
Well, and this is as good as it gets for OKC. When the question going into your offseason isn't what can we do to get better, it's, is there anything we can do to kind of get ahead of this and extend our window, right? And you almost don't want to, break something up or fix something if it ain't broke, right? That's going to be their biggest question throughout the offseason is like, do we get ahead of this thing? Do we trade, Lou Dort right now? Do we move on from this guy or that guy? And do we not sign these 3 guys? Like, it's those kind of questions. And ultimately they're still going to have their main core. And their main core, I'm talking those big 3, right? But aside from that, even the role players that they end up getting with how great OKC has been at building that team, Sam Presti and co, they're going to stay competitive for a very long time. And they continue to have pick after pick after pick. They can take some chances. They can go for project type players, right? Like this is the advantage to having the kind of team that you do and the kind of, I guess timeline that you do is you can take these kind of chances in drafts and you can take these kind of chances, in free agency on guys that you wouldn't otherwise. And if it doesn't work out, it's okay. We'll move on.
Exactly. And yeah, so they're in a great spot OKC is. And, on the Indiana side of things, we'll talk the Eastern Conference and what this does with Indiana being out. Honestly, without Tyrese, they look like a different team. They play like a different team. They're going to feel like a different team until he gets back. But the East is in a state of disarray where it could literally be anybody's for the taking next year. So you're seeing a lot of teams react to that. And I think for OKC, obviously the West is as insane as ever, and we'll talk about that too. But the fact that they have the continuity, and they're probably, if they do lose a few guys, it's going to be, role players that didn't play the biggest role, like an Aaron Wiggins or an Isaiah Joe or an Isaiah Hardenstein, probably one of those guys, and they can keep everyone else and roll with it again. And then they still have young guys on the table ready to play next year. Like they really are ready to just kind of retool this thing and run it back again. But yeah, so I think for OKC, this was a hell of a year, great year in a sport that has become so up in the air every season, where the parity's finally gotten to a point where there is a different champion every year. OKC does truly feel like a team that can sustain this, so long as everything, health, fitting, and everything like that. The two teams that made it to the finals this year were the two healthiest teams, and Haliburton going down at the end was kind of the final straw, and that sucks that was the ending that we got to what was an incredible series. But it is what it is. OKC's the champions, and they were deserving. I don't think that the injury. Listen, anyone can say what they want. Oh, Tyrese hitting shots, like they totally could have won that game, but they didn't. That's the reality. OKC's the champ, and now everything that OKC did is validated. It's the same thing with like the Eagles, right? You make all these moves, you take some gambles on these guys, and all of a sudden you're set up for years to come. But even if you don't have insane success these next couple years, you got the one that was right there. No one's going to look at you and say, "Oh, you missed. This is the one that got away," type of thing for OKC. So they're in a great spot. Excited for them, happy for them. They're going to be a problem for years to come.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's pivot on over. So before we get into the NBA, the news around the NBA, let's bring it back home. We haven't, it's time to talk about the Kings. And we're recording on Thursday night, and the day two of the NBA draft, round 2, has just concluded. We talked about last week having, coming to do a draft on Tuesday and do it beforehand, but then we kind of thought to ourselves, we're like, we have no idea what was coming. We didn't know if there was reports we were going to trade in, but nothing had happened yet. So we were unsure. We were like, we don't want to just throw out a bunch of names of players in a random range. So we waited till post-draft, and we got surprised. Scott Perry made a move, went into the first round, and he traded it into pick 24 to draft Nique Clifford from Colorado State. And then today, he drafted Maxime Raynaud from Stanford, and the center from Stanford. And this was an interesting duo of players. I actually think this was these are really solid picks for the Kings. And Scott Perry definitely took those same kind of approach for both of these guys. You take older players who have spent 4+ years in college and improved every season, and has this past season proven production from both players. And they both offer a level of versatility from both sides of the ball. So let's start with our first round pick, Nique Clifford. I really like this guy. I wasn't going into the draft process. He's a name I paid attention to, but I didn't know what his range was. And to get a player like him at our spot at 24, I think is a perfect spot for a player of that caliber, especially an older player. This is a guy that you want in the rotation right away. If you watch his film, he's extremely fluid. Last year at Colorado State, he was a redshirt senior, so he basically had 2 senior years. And it was almost like a Keegan Murray style jump in responsibility from his school, where he was kind of the gadget player, off ball, a little bit of everything kind of guy. And then last year he was the do everything, the team's going to run through me type of player. And you could see how comfortable he was being the one responsible and shouldering the load, being able to score, defend, and pass. Like, he has all these physical tools, not to mention he averaged 9.6 rebounds, which he was the shortest player, and he's 6'5", so he's not like a super tall guy, but is also not super short either. But in that range, he's the shortest player to go get over 9 boards. So it shows his natural athleticism, his ability to make difficult plays, and he brings tools that we really desperately need. And you get another guy with a bunch of traits that you can bank on, who has experience, who's NBA ready, who you can throw in the rotation right now. And I can imagine a bench of him and Devin Carter coming up and just being pesky and pestering people off the bench right away. And he can provide a Josh Hart-ish physical presence, and just hustle. And you want that on your team. And I like the size. I like the measurables. What do you think? Are you excited that we got a player like him, or were you thinking, oh, we're going to get like a point guard instead?
I expected a point guard because, obviously it is a new general manager. I understand that, but the trend for a number of years now has been getting an older guard, like a small ball guard. Like it is what it is. So I absolutely expected to get a guard. We still kind of got a guard, but we got more of a wing, and obviously that was a position of need for the Kings. We've talked about needing, wing depth for 22,000 years, it feels like now. And obviously now getting Nique, I think is heightening that depth a little bit. I'm curious to see where he's at. Obviously he they claim he's NBA ready, which I definitely see in a lot of the tape. They claim he's NBA ready, claim he's going to be essentially like a plug and play player. What I'm curious about is, where does he scratch our rotation? And obviously this is a conversation for much, much later in the offseason, as we approach the preseason, when this team's more established, because we don't know what this team is going to look like in a matter of months, right? But as it sits, I would be super excited to see what he does look like in a bench role for the Kings, coming in and providing a solid 10 to 13 minutes or something like that, and getting that versatility, getting that defensive edge, getting a little bit more of that action that we haven't really seen from the wing position outside of like Keegan Murray. I'm excited. I think this is a solid pick. He was mocked all over the place. I remember some mocks that had him like around 10th at one point. So it was kind of all over the place in terms of where he was going to land, but ultimately to fall to 24 and for the Kings to, trade and get into 24. Let's talk about that trade for a second. That was an awesome trade. I don't think people realize just how good the trade is in regard, but that pick that we traded, that the Kings traded, was the 2027 protected pick. And the way that pick would work, essentially, if I'll make it easy. If San Antonio is a playoff team in 2027, that pick would have turned into 2 second-round picks, right? So if we look at it from that standpoint, the Kings trade 2 second-round picks for a first-round pick for this year. I think that's awesome. Yeah. I think that's a really solid move. I think it's absolutely something that that if there was a move that could have been out there on the table that Scott Perry could have made, this was probably the best one. And he gets one of his guys. Nique was one of the guys that they brought into the facility that they were pretty high on. They got to know him a lot over the last month or two. This was a name that they were keeping an eye on. And as this board kind of fell, and it didn't fall necessarily as everyone expected, it never really does, but it was similar to the projected. As it fell, I think Perry was like, this is falling where we need it to. 24. Sam Presti, let's get on the phone. Let's make a deal. You're not going to screw me over. We're going to have a 1-for-1 deal here. This is going to be a win-win party. And that's hard to do with a guy as skilled as Sam is at the general manager position. So I'm thrilled. I thought as his first player move that Scott Perry has made, it was an A+ move, and I'm thrilled about it.
Yeah, I think the value is what makes this pick really good, because I think the only real knock people can, when I hear people talk about Nique, the biggest knock that was discussed was his age. They're like, oh, he's 23 years old already. He's going to be 24 basically once the season starts. So yeah, you get an older rookie, but no one ever said anything about his style of play, his effort, his overall skill level. And I think that's something that I think he has all the tools to translate. I think you can play him alongside anybody, any one of our guards. So again, he adds another layer of versatility if we want to go big and we want to have bigger guards or a bigger wing in there. You can play him alongside Keegan and Keon. There's probably a whole lineup where it's Devin, Keon, Nique, Keegan, and Domas or whoever you want to throw it in there at center, and or you can go small ball too. And like you have now, all of a sudden he provides good enough size where you can put him in different spots. And you're prepping in a way for are we going to be able to keep Jake LaRavia? Are we going to decide to move off of DeMar and Malik? And that's going to be where we're going to talk about that in a little bit of kind of where we think the direction of this team is. But he's a guy that can fill multiple spots, and so you kind of have versatility in the moves you want to make. And then when we talk about our second rounder, Maxime Raynaud, you had texted me, you were texting me a few different guys. You're like, oh, I think we could get this guy. I think we could get this guy. And I think were you surprised that we drafted a center as, in this draft? And I know when we talk about Maxime, he has a nice background to him. He has great level of production last year, but was this pick still surprising to you?
Yeah, I was looking at the best available players at that point, and out of the names that were on the board, his was not the one I expected to come off. I'm not mad at it at all. I think this is a super solid pick. Obviously as I watch more film on him, I watched his highlight reel as soon as we drafted him, and I got to know his name, Maxime Raynaud. Like it's he's an exciting prospect. It was not a name I expected, but to kind of like talk about him for a second, started playing really competitive basketball at age 17. So he was, on the older side when he started playing actual competitive basketball. He enters college, and his freshman year, he's really doesn't get much playing time. He couldn't really crack the rotation, struggled at times. Sophomore year, he cracks the rotation and gets some, decent runs, and shows a little bit of what he can do, show some development. His junior year, he takes a massive leap, and he starts averaging, I think it was like 15 points and like right around 7 rebounds a game, and showed flashes of like a serious leap, and he won Pac-12 most improved player of the year in his junior year. So then comes senior year, obviously at that point he's tenured, he's been there a number of years, he's going to be relied on as a veteran and a leader. He steps into a much larger role where ultimately he's one of the best players in the Pac-12, right? And one of the best players in the nation by a lot of standpoints at the center position. And that is, something that really stands out to me is as I'm looking at him, and kind of his college experience, like he was averaging at that point, 20 and almost 11 rebounds, 20 points, 11 rebounds on just about 2 assists. And he was what, runner up of the Kareem Abdul-Jabbar Center of the Year award. So his college progression every single year has gotten better and better and better and better. And that to me is something like, when we're drafting anybody, whether it's basketball, football, hockey, baseball, whatever, what I'm looking for is, are you getting better year after year, or are you, regressing and then showing signs of better and then regressing, or, what does it look like for Raynaud? He's progressively just gotten better and better. And that to me stands out as something that he's somebody who's able to learn. He's somebody who's interested in wanting to get better year in and year out. And now he's going to a team where, his play style is something that the Kings aren't necessarily used to. We're not used to having a 7-footer who's able to, extend the half court the way that he's able to. And obviously he's a little bit more info on him. His shooting splits are interesting and fun to watch. But the biggest thing to note is like he's not great at shooting the 3 ball off of posts or off of picks, like pick and pops, but he's a lot better at catch and shoots. And that's something to keep an eye on, especially when and if you keep a guy like a DeMar DeRozan, or you obviously hang on to Zach LaVine and you're running that ISO level basketball that we love so much. And your center's out there on the 3-point line having, and the defense helps away, he's going to be wide open. So there's going to be options, and I'm curious to see, again, like his utilization in this offense and in this system. Because, again, this is a player that the Kings aren't really used to. But I do like this pick, and I'm pretty thrilled with it.
Yeah, I think, when you talk about the player in general, I think this is, again, when you talk about the value, this is another excellent high value pick. He was mocked in the first round in a lot of drafts, like mock drafts. He was in the first round talent. So to be able to get him at 42 without having to do anything about it is a really good spot. And it opens up the door to, okay, what path are the Kings trying to take? Do you now, when you have Raynaud and you have Isaac Jones, in your youth in the front court, do you then want to use Jonas as a package with either a Malik or a DeMar to maybe go get a bigger fish or maybe to set yourself up for the future. Again, you're getting a player with, like you said, improvement every year. He's still learning, like when you start the game at 17, he still has a lot of ways he can learn. A lot of little nuances to the game that I'm excited for him to kind of get into the lab with a lot of these guys. Like Domas is going to be a good mentor. He'll get to learn from Trey on how to play on the outside at
Mm-hmm.
that size. So I think it's going to be a good spot for him to get better. And, he's not a slouch on defense. He's not the most athletic guy, but he's definitely not a slouch. He had 55 blocks last year. He was a presence. His size, he knows how to use it. So I think that's important to know. He's not completely raw. So I still have to do a little bit more on him, but I heard of his name beforehand and I have been in touch with his skill set. I just wasn't anticipating him either. It was an interesting, we got guys who I wasn't anticipating. I wasn't sure what direction we were going to go. But overall, I was really happy with this. These past 2 days, the first two moves of Scott Perry's tenure have been, good. You're like, okay, we'll take this. This isn't a disaster or no one's talking about us in a bad way. Like, this is good. This is what you want. So you got two players who I think, fit the timeline. Yeah, they're not like the youngest of, projects that you can say, oh, the upside is totally there. But you're getting two high floor players who can potentially contribute this season. And in a league that is turning into less stars, more depth, we're shoring up depth with quality players. And I think, that can't be understated. And I think that's a good approach. So, I think given the limited assets we had going into this, I think this was good that we walked away with two quality players.
Agreed. So let's try and put a grade to this draft for the Sacramento Kings. Let's try and dial in a BTB draft grade here that we just watched the Kings in their first draft with Scott Perry. So, I'm looking at kind of everything. I'm not just looking at the players that we drafted. I'm looking at obviously the move to get into the first round. I'm taking that into account. I'm taking into account how many players that the Kings brought in for workouts and got to know. I mean, they led the league in pre-draft workouts. Like, I'm taking all of this into account because that was a lot of draft prep. And there was a lot that went into this to ultimately go and get guys that they feel are best. Obviously, we don't know what they're going to pan out, how they're going to look. Unfortunately, there's no, we're not part of the Cali Classic, so we don't get to watch these two play. That would be really cool because I'm not going to lie to you. I want to see how they look.
Yeah.
But I'm taking all this into account right now. And my early thoughts, I'm going to go A- on this. I don't want to get crazy and be like, A+, y'all nailed this. These guys are going to carry our team to the playoffs. Like, I'm not going to go crazy. But, looking at the players we got and assuming the style of players and assuming the immediate impact of these guys, I think we got some solid depth. We got guys that are going to, work to get better. Obviously, this is a draft. Like, you have two picks. It's pretty easy to go completely wrong, right? Because you don't have a lot of chances in this. And I feel like the Kings did everything that they could to position themselves in the first round and position themselves in a way that they get their guys. So I'm giving it an A-. I feel pretty good about it. What do you think?
I think an A- is fair. I think we can make that the BTB grade because you're right. It's not an A+ because I do think when we talk about positional value, I think it does give it a bump given where they selected the players that they selected at that time. I thought both of those players, 24 and 42, great places to get them. And like you said, the pick to get there, the trade to get there made total sense. Everything was good. But I do think, there was a better mix that they probably could have gone to in terms of potential versus getting these win now guys or these potentially more ready players. But no, I think this is great. I think you're making the best of a situation where you were completely unsure of what you had going into this, and the fact that you come away with two quality players who could potentially, make a difference. And these are your first two moves of your tenure, and you got a long off season ahead of you. I think you got to start. He needed to start really well if he wanted this to go for anyone to kind of view it in a positive light, because I think if he had come out right away and botched it kind of like how the Brooklyn Nets did and drafted point guard after point guard after point guard, that didn't make sense. You do weird things, or like the Pelicans when you're trading up and giving up future assets to go out and get Derek Queen, and I'm like, this is an interesting move. So you make quality moves, and everyone, we're saying great moves by the Kings, and that's something that you want to tip your hat to if everyone collectively agrees that this was a really solid draft. So yeah, A- I think is a good place. Were there, when we talk about the draft as a whole, were there any guys that kind of like you saw their name go and you're like, oh, he ended up here? Crazy. What did you think? Anyone surprised you?
Knupple was the first
Knuckle.
one that surprised me. And I just didn't really expect that from the Hornets, but the one that really got me was Ace Bailey to the Jazz.
That was interesting.
And initially I'm like, okay, well, obviously it didn't work out for a single team, which was kind of weird in and of itself. So you expected a little bit of a slide, you didn't know exactly where. So initially you're like, all right, Utah, sure. But then like 2 picks later, they're talking about it, ESPN's talking about it, finally doing some good reporting. And they say, that it was not one of his preferred destinations. He wasn't really interested in going to Utah, and you're seeing this camera shot of him, just kind of like standing there looking a little bit upset about it. And I know he kind of cleared the air up later about it, but yeah, Ace Bailey and that whole situation was a little interesting to me.
Yeah, no, I think I think the whole Ace thing, I think now, 24 hours, 48 hours after the fact, I think for him, I think he looks back at the team that he's on right now and I think, he's in a good spot for the kind of player that he is, especially since they got Walter Clayton at pick 18. I thought that was an awesome pick for them to kind of pair. So they walked away with a couple awesome players. I thought an interesting one was that and again, I could be saying this in reverse because of the culture of it all. I forget how he says it. It's either Yang Hansen or Hansen Yang.
Mm-hmm.
That center that Memphis took. He was mocked going into this whole draft as a second round pick, but everyone was like in the combine, they're like, I love his talent. He played in the California Classic when they had just the
Cooked.
China team, and he played really well. They're
Yeah.
calling him the Asian Jokic. So, you're getting
Yeah.
that much hype. He is a project player. So I think for
Mm-hmm.
Memphis, I understood the pick, but I was just shocked that it happened that early. And I know, they obviously have been making a ton of moves, and Edie is out he's going to be out for the first few months of the season. So I think this was a move that it's like, hey, we don't want to have to change up our system. Let's get a guy that makes a lot of sense, and that could end up working out in the long run. But he surprised me, and I liked, and yeah, the Walter Clayton was a good spot. I was surprised by New Orleans trading up 10 spots to get Derek Queen because I don't see the fit for him and Zion. And that's the part that I'm like, well, then I don't know what New Orleans wants to do because, they
Mm.
also traded McCollum away, and we'll talk about, the East in a bit, but they traded McCollum away for Jordan Poole. So it's like, oh, you got Jordan Poole along in this scenario too. You still have all, your wings, your Herb Jones and your Trey Murphys, but like
Right.
it's a weird situation for them. I was surprised that they did that. But hey, if that's their guy and they really maybe they're prepping for life without Zion here in a little bit, but I don't know. Like that one was a head scratcher to me. And Brooklyn, it was funny.
Yeah.
Brian Windhorst was receiving texts from GM saying that they were laughing at the picks that Brooklyn were making. Like they were like, these are terrible picks. Why are they drafting multiple point guards when they don't have to?
Oh,
It
Jordy.
was an interesting, like, for Brooklyn. I didn't think they were going to pick all these dudes. I
Yeah.
didn't realize it was going to be an effort draft for them. It was really,
Mm-hmm.
it sucks because I was hoping Jordy was going to end up with like a good guy too. So it's, it was a little tough. I was surprised, but
So there's an interesting trend as you talk about these teams, and this is another reason I'm gonna say A-, and I'm pretty locked in on that now for the Kings. All these teams that you just talked about, they all have an identity crisis. They all don't know what they want to look like in the future. They don't know what they want to look like in the short term, right? And the Kings are one of those teams as well. And yet they didn't botch this draft.
Yeah.
Like they made good moves and they made good picks that you can justify, even just from an outside perspective. If we didn't know jack about the Kings and we're looking at an outside perspective, we knew they lacked in wing depth and we knew they were probably going to be lacking in center depth eventually, like coming up, right? So this is like, it kind of makes sense as to why the Kings drafted the way they did. And it just goes to kind of prove my A- point that like that this was a really solid draft considering where the Kings are at.
I agree. I think this was a good spot for him. So I think it's a good time to pivot now. From the draft, now that we made these two selections, this opens up a potential realm for what the next move of this Kings Scott Perry roster is going to be. Now, there's been reports that, he did what he wanted to do. He got players that were, long and can play both sides of the ball with these two draft picks. That's great. Now the hunt continues, I should say, for the point guard position. And what the final decision is going to be, what's the market for guys like Malik, for DeMar, for even now Jonas, now that we have a backup center. Does this avenue open up for even bigger move, or just a move that allows us to make a move down the road type of thing, addition by subtraction type of vibe. So let me ask you and I kind of had this discussion off pod a little bit, but I think it was important to have, given the guys that we drafted, and if you want to just kind of imagine the roster as it's constructed, who's the odd man out in your opinion? Who's the guy that doesn't make sense for the future of the roster if you're going for a trade piece? So a Malik, maybe even Devin Carter, because he's been rumored to be in rumors as well. DeMar DeRozan and now Jonas. If we kind of had to put those four together, who maybe means the most to the team and would make sense with these young guys right now, even if we do trade him midway through the season type of thing? You know what I'm saying? So just kind of give me what you're feeling right now post draft.
That's a tough one. We've been seeing so many reports about this team, and they've evaluated the trade market on everybody. I think it's safe to say at this point, and that includes even recently Domantas Sabonis. But it was reported today they're not going to be trading him. Those things can change. It's an ever fluid situation in the offseason. But if I had to order those guys as I guess, and you're asking me if I think who I believe is most likely to be traded. Okay.
Yes.
So I'm probably going to say the most likely for me is Malik. I think Malik's at this point, based on what I've heard actually today, I was listening to Matt George's Locked On Kings podcast, and he alluded to DeMar DeRozan and hearing rumblings of DeMar being more and more likely to, stay here in Sacramento, at least through, the start of training camp. So based on hearing things like that and hearing consistently how Malik Monk is being floated out there and the interest that teams have in Malik Monk, I think it's most likely he's on the out. He's got the most, valuable contract on the Kings, which makes him the most likely to be included in a trade, whether it's a splash move or, just a move to set you up for the future. So I think Malik is my number one, unfortunately, right now. And I'll circle back to that in a few minutes after I get yours. But Malik Monk, number one. I think number two for me is going to be DeMar. And then 3 is Domas.
Jonas or Domas?
Jonas, sorry. Jonas. I'm going to put Jonas 3. Yeah. And then the fourth one was
Carter, Devin Carter.
Carter. Oh, I'm going to say he's 4th, actually. Because I think there's a level of he's young. He, obviously we just drafted a center. I know we just drafted a wing as well, but I think Carter is he's a building block in a lot of ways into a strong role player. I think he's got everything it takes to be that, and he's just got some more development to do. Obviously, he played really a half of a season last year, and we saw glimpses of really good stuff. We saw some glimpses of some really bad stuff. So, yeah, I'm gonna lock that in. I'm gonna say Malik is my number one, DeMar number 2, Jonas number 3, and Devin Carter number 4.
I would say the same thing. I had it that way too. But it really does come down to the contract. I think stylistically, with the guys that we drafted now. So if you're telling me we're running a lineup out there, even of like Keon, you could tell me we could even, if we wanted to go like crazy small and do like Keon, Nique, DeMar, because I'm assuming this is like bench guys, subbing in right now, like Keon, Nique, DeMar,
Mhm.
Keegan, or maybe even Laravia or Dre, and like Domas chilling at center. And you can just see a world where having a connector like Nique would, and especially who can rebound the way he can, is really important for a guy who plays so much isolation, and DeMar, who's basically like, hey, you're only going to touch this ball after I'm posting someone up if you catch my miss. And I think that, Nique is uniquely prepared to handle that kind of role where he can just play a connector. I understand, like, people are going to talk about, well, he was so ball dominant in college, but that wasn't always the case. He started off as a role player. He had to learn the ropes first before he was given the reins to say, hey, let's do this. So I do think, like, I kind of like the idea of DeMar because, yeah, DeMar is nowhere near the athlete or the defender he used to be, but he is still 6'7", 6'6". He still has a good
Yeah.
sized wing. So if you're telling me defensively speaking, we have a bunch of larger guard slash wings out there, you're going to feel really good about switchability and
Hmm.
being able to feel like, okay, DeMar isn't completely alone on an island anymore. And I think that's important when discussing with someone like Malik, who consistently gets picked on defensively, even though he has made strides and has improved in his effort and things like that. He's just 6'1", it's like,
Yeah.
or six,
Yeah.
he's a smaller guy. So it's just like Devin Carter is the same height as Malik, but Devin Carter is a physically more, he's able to get more physical. He has the natural ability, with the vertical too. I know Malik is an excellent vertical and dunker and stuff, but he uses it more for the finesse, not the power that
Yeah.
Carter does. So I do think Carter gives me that Case and Wallace style of defender from guard, which you really need.
Well,
And
he's
I
got
could
some
see,
of the
yeah,
unteachables too. Like he's
exactly.
like his defensive, his just knack for being in the right spot and reading something before it happens is unique.
Yeah, that's one of the things that put me on Carter last year. I was like, I understand he's a guard, but like for everything we were like trying to build in the way the league's going, Carter has all the tools for your
Hmm.
new prototypical off the bench guard that you need.
Exactly.
And I that's why I still believe in him. And I think if we found a rotation, we need, and again, this comes down to now if we switch to the free agency of it all, the Kings need a new point guard, a stopgap point guard, I guess, until, because the question is, how do they view Carter? Do they view Carter as like a Keon, how they ran him last year, where they ran Keon at points sometimes when injuries happened? And do they want Carter to kind of take that role and let Keon mainly be the two? Because if you watch like the way Indiana plays, right, Tyrese, even in the games, like, yeah, sometimes they were struggling, but there were stretches in the finals where it was Nemhard taking the
Yeah.
ball up the floor instead of Tyrese. It's not like you need your point guard specifically to handle the ball up and down the floor every single time. You just need guys who don't turn the ball over and
Even the
can.
Kings were doing that with De'Aaron Fox and Malik Monk running those two
Yeah,
together.
exactly. So it's like there are ways where you're like, oh, you don't need the best ball handler in the planet to run
Hmm.
an NBA offense. I think just with the ISO style that we had last year, a player who could have broken down a defense a little bit better was probably going to be more useful. But this year, if we come up with a system that's a little bit more tailored to the players that we have versus here's a bunch of guys that we're throwing together, and that stuff we'll figure out in the offseason, right? But like, I'm imagining a world where maybe they have a more clean, consistent offense. You can see these guys thriving in it. And I think even the
100%.
rookies too. So um, free agency wise, there's been rumors of Dennis Schroeder, Russell Westbrook,
Hmm.
point guard wise. And we had talked about, the Trey, Darius Garland, Drew Holiday, but all those guys we would have to trade for, and it would have been a whole lot to have to dissect for any team that gets involved in for a point guard like that. So I guess in order for us, if we still want a point guard down the road, I think Malik is the best avenue to acquire one. It's just a matter of who that would be and how the financials match up. Is this a guy, are we trading for a guy who's going to be our franchise point guard for the next 5 years? Or are we going to rely on stopgap after stopgap until we draft the dude that the team truly believes in? So, it'll be interesting to see. But what do you think, what would you be okay with for the Kings? I know our options are a little weird and we don't know. We know all these trades happen, so you don't really
Yeah,
realize the scope of who really is available, right? Because I
right.
didn't know Anthony Simons was available like that, type of thing.
You mean
So
you didn't know that Luka Doncic was available at the
yeah,
trade deadline last year? Come
exactly.
on,
So
dude.
so it's like these are the things you never know, right? So based off of the information we have
Yeah.
and some of the rumors that we've heard, what would you be okay with for this roster?
So, I've been locked in on one player for a number of years. Um, but really this offseason with the rumors that started very recently, and I knew he was a free agent, but I didn't know how serious his team would get about this option. And after seeing the reported interest that the Kings have in him, um, I'm pretty locked in on him. And I have my number two, but my number one right now is Russell Westbrook. And I get the slander that people have with him. I get that like
Westbrook.
I get everything. All right. Like he is such a competitor. And this is the part to me that wants him on this team. He is such a competitor. He is such a high level player. Whether he still has, that MVP caliber, abilities, no. But what he does have is a leadership mentality. And he's definitely somebody that players around the league have talked about being on a team with Russell Westbrook versus being a competitor against Russell Westbrook. And when you're on a team with Russell Westbrook, he elevates you, not just on the court, but in the locker room. And I think right now this team, they have a decent leader in DeMar DeRozan, but DeMar has never been the guy to step up and really necessarily lead like a locker room. He might lead you on some possessions and take over games late, right? But it's different versus a guy like a Russell Westbrook is somebody who he's been on some big stages. He's been in the league for so many years now. He's been on a number of teams in a number of situations. He's been even a part of some minor rebuilds. Seeing him on a team where there is almost no identity right now excites me because he brings an identity immediately. He brings a gritty, competitive, like we're just going to come at you with everything that we've got. And if it's not good enough, it's okay. We're going to rebound. We're going to do it again. Like he brings that mentality to me. It's just like, it's a tough mentality that I want to see a part of this Kings organization. And I think, not just the players on the court, but the organization, the front office, like the fan base would benefit from having a guy like a Russell Westbrook and just that spirit in the building.
Yeah, and I think if we want to make a Kings comparison to it, I think this would, and listen, much worse team, much more toxic situation. But I do think that if we got a guy like Westbrook, it would compare to us getting Rondo that year where we had, Boogie and Gay. So you get a guy who's just been there, done that, not the best shooter, but can run an NBA offense just as well. And he's a consistent defender. And listen, if we end up winning the Russell Westbrook experience next year, um, we're gonna be seeing multiple possessions where the guy guarding him is giving him 10 feet of space and daring him to shoot a three, and how the offense responds to that is going to look weird. And how much would he come in and be our starter right away type of thing, or would he be the sixth man and we roll with one of the young guys, and just have him there in case things go south, type of thing. So having him or even a guy like Dennis Schroeder would be interesting. Schroeder's a better shooter, but not much. And obviously Schroeder has a lot of experience in this league, having successful years, but he's also, 31, and Russell is also in his 30s. So it's like you're going to bank on a veteran point guard. I know there's options out there like Tyus Jones and things like that too. So it's like the thing for the Kings is, I think us as fans should be prepared. No matter who ends up being the point guard of the Sacramento Kings next year, I think there's going to ultimately we're going to feel a level of we're going to feel underwhelmed by who our starting point guard is. Well, even if it's like Devin Carter, right? We'll be like, okay, we believe in him, but we still don't know. It's not like we have Fox or Haliburton just chilling, knowing that our point guard position is good to go. So no matter what, going into next year, we're going to have a point guard position that can be improved upon. So for me now, at this point, I'm just like, okay, let's figure out these other moves first, right? And if one of those moves ends up with us getting a point guard for the foreseeable future, we're like, okay, great. But if we make moves to shore out the rest of the roster and say, hey, we're plugging in one of these dudes this year and hoping maybe we land someone in the draft next year, I'm cool with that.
Yeah.
Like at this stage, I'm cool with it because I don't know. The whole question was we don't know what the Kings were going to do. And I think there's a level of, I don't think Scott Perry's going to do anything rash. I don't think he's going to do a whole, we need to win right now type of move unless it makes perfect sense.
I hope he doesn't.
He had mentioned something about patience. He had preached like, oh, this is going to be a process, like remain patient type of thing. So I think not just for the Kings, but we're going to talk about this in a second. This year feels like such a weird year. This upcoming season, it's gonna feel like a gap year for so many teams. Like this 2025 2026 season's all going to be in preparation for the 2026 2027 season, and it's going to feel so weird. It's because the way this past season looked compared to how it's going to look next year is going to be completely different, and it's going to be crazy. So if you're cool with it, I think we can pivot on to just kind of touch up on where the rest of the league is now post-draft, post-Tyrese Haliburton injury. So there was a ridiculous amount of trades that happened in the past week. Well, when we spoke, we had talked about what I don't know if it had happened yet. Had the Durant trade happened at that point? Or
No,
we
we were
talked about
still
the
waiting.
idea? Yeah, we had talked about the idea, right? And then Durant gets traded to Houston for Jalen Green, Dylan Brooks, and picks and like 5 second rounders and a first rounder thrown in there. Number one, thought that was an awesome trade for both parties. I think Phoenix needed to get off of Durant. They get a young guy in Jalen Green. Houston never believed in Jalen Green, and they got rid of Dylan Brooks. The attitude that he brought, we'll see if they lose whatever spunk they have there, because that's the kind of player he is. He's like the energy guy.
Yeah.
But I think for Houston, it makes them a lot better because they didn't have to give up. They didn't have to give up anyone of consequence that they weren't already planning on getting rid of in the first place. Like Dylan Brooks has that Malik Monk style contract where it's easily tradable. You can put him wherever you want. And Jalen Green, like, we're not going to pay him his extension, so we might as well just get something for him while we can. And to get Kevin Durant, and you're surrounding him with Amen Thompson, Şengün, Jabari Smith, Tari Easton. They restructured Van Vliet's deal, so he's extended for less. And now you have like Reed Shepherd and Cam Whitmore just waiting in the wings. Like, they got guys, dude. I think Houston this is their move to say, hey, we're going to contend. We're going to try and contend with these young guys and see if we can get 2 or 3 years of Durant. Because say what you want about Durant, but he hasn't averaged under 25 points in the past 5 seasons. So I don't see, if you're just getting the 25 plus points a game from Durant, they were like the Indiana Pacers of the West Coast. They have versatile players all over the place, but they were missing a number one. And now they got their number one guy who can get him a bucket at any given time and let everybody else do the rest of the work for him. So I think this was a win-win move for Phoenix. Maybe not for Devin Booker, but for Phoenix, they got out of the Durant situation and they have a young piece in Jalen Green who they can say, okay, let's see if we can make this and Booker work, or if not, we'll trade him for something else. So that's kind of how I felt about that one.
No, and I agree. I think it was a really win-win trade. And on the Kevin Durant subject is the only thing I'm going to say on this. People like to, say he's older and he's getting washed and he can't stay healthy. Well, on the healthy subject, actually, real quick, on the on the wash subject, no, he's not. You're an idiot. Because like you just said, 25 plus points in the last 5 years is wild. I mean, 25 plus points for his entire career, right?
Yeah.
Career. So that's wild. And on top of that, now the availability thing, he played 62 games last year, 75 the year before that. Obviously 8 games in 22-23 with that massive injury, but his availability is there, man. Like he's a style of player that can stay available. So as he continues to age, I don't think the question is going to be if he can stay healthy. I think the question is going to be, can he really keep up this level of scoring? And I think that's the better question. And it's still going to be yes, because it's freaking Kevin Durant. That's all I got to say about that.
Yeah, and you surround him with a lot of guys where he doesn't have to be the focal point every single possession. And you can run the offense through Şengün. Who knows what Thompson's going to be? So it's like you have you have the pieces there that make sense for the Rockets to go trade Durant. So that was on the West Coast side of things, and that was the one that really got everyone's attention because all of a sudden the Rockets in the West, they have to be taken seriously as a contender given where they were last year. And I would argue that if they had Durant in this year in this playoffs, they wouldn't have lost to the Warriors. I just think that that's what they were missing. This whole series was just a go-to guy to get them big buckets. So I think that he's going to solve a lot of problems for them next year, so long as, again, this is the rule for every single team, so long as they stay healthy and everything goes their way type of thing. So, but then we look around the rest of the league and we go to the Eastern Conference. So now, we had talked before the finals ending where, the Pacers are in just as good of a spot in the East that, even if they don't win the finals, man, it didn't go the way they wanted to, but they will compete. They'll be right back. They'll be in a position to come back. Now the Haliburton injury happens. You lose a guy who's going to make this, you're probably losing anywhere between 8 to 10 wins next year just off of what he brings alone. Now, could these guys because they have a deep roster, do they have guys that can step up? Or do they kind of want to say, okay, next year's going to be a gap year. Let's trade Mather and see what we can get out of him, or let's trade Top and see what we can get out of them, and just try and retool for when Tyrese can come back, because I don't think he's coming back next year, and I don't think that would make sense even if he were to be ready by the playoffs. I don't see why you would just rush him right back into the playoffs. So I think he's just out the whole year next year. I think that'd be the right move for them. He's still young enough. But then you look at the rest of the East, and everyone kind of made these moves because of that. You got Tyrese and Tatum out, so all of a sudden Indy and Boston are in question. So Orlando makes this move. Now they're thrusted up in the East. Atlanta traded for Kristaps Porzingis in a trade before the draft, and I'm trying to think exactly what happened to who did they end up? Didn't Atlanta just draft somebody pretty nice too? I'm trying to remember if Atlanta did, or maybe they made that trade to get Porzingis. That was the part I'm trying to figure out.
I think it was the trade to get Porzingis.
Yeah. So, but Atlanta's all of a sudden in this awesome spot because they haven't traded Trey. So they have Trey, Porzingis, and a bunch of wings around them that, and Risa Shea next year in his second year, he had an awesome rookie year. So it'll be interesting to see how that team looks, and they're going to get Jalen Johnson back. Like Atlanta's going to be they're going to be a trendy pick next year.
They drafted Asa Newell.
There they go. Yeah, they drafted Asa Newell, the kid from Georgia. Yeah, that's what I thought. So they add all this. They fit the mold for your typical team that wins, right? So you surround Trey with just a bunch of defenders and shooters, and Asa Newell is going to be a perfect fit for that, especially if Kristaps, which he most likely will, go down at some point in the season. But you see these teams taking chances, and even the Washington Wizards go out and acquire a CJ McCollum, and they drafted Dre Johnson. So you all of a sudden see this team that has CJ McCollum, Chris Middleton, Alexander Sarr, and you're like, okay, well, even Washington's trying to be competitive, especially if they got rid of Jordan Poole. You can tell they're trying to be serious. So it's interesting that you're getting kind of this knee-jerk reaction from the East Coast team saying, hey, we're not going to be good as these West Coast teams, but we don't need to beat the West Coast to get to the finals. So let's just push now and see if we can't get there. The Bulls look interesting with all the picks they have, and Giddey finding his spot there too. Like, the East is going to be a very interesting thing to look out for next year, because Milwaukee's going to be hurt. Who knows when Dame comes back? You got Boston out, Indy's out. Cleveland is probably going to be the favorite so long as if the reports come out, everyone's healthy, ready for the season. I think Cleveland would be the favorite because they're going to keep everybody now. And I think that's great for Cleveland because they don't feel the pressure of, all these teams around us are getting better. So do you think it's the right move for these teams to go for it? Or do you think that some of these teams may regret it moving forward? Or if there's a team that stuck out to you making these trades that you're like, oh, I truly believe in this team now that they made this move?
Houston's the only team that I truly believe in after, that we just talked about. That's the only team I truly believe in to take another step here and potentially, get it from that great team to elite team, right? And that status is extremely hard to get to. But it's difficult to say whether it was the right or wrong thing, because obviously it's still early in the offseason. But like, You kind of said it best earlier when you talked about how this next season is going to be kind of crazy, and that it's essentially a gap year or a bridge year to get you ready and get your team right for 2026, 27. And for a lot of teams, I think that's the case. And I think that's why you see, the Celtics selling stock and, the Suns obviously trying to get out of the situation they're in and just find any direction whatsoever. So, I think for some teams, for all teams, it varies. But I think for most teams, um, especially in the East right now, you're looking at how wide open it is. And I think a lot of them are looking themselves in the mirror. Look at Orlando right now, too. Orlando is a team that can absolutely get back to, exactly where they were at. And they can easily get up into the conversation of top 3 with the addition of, I'm blanking. Help me
Desmond
out.
Bane.
Desmond Bane, thank you so much.
Yeah.
For an egregious amount of first round picks. But getting Desmond Bane and they're looking around the room, like I said last week, and saying, well, why can't we contend right now? We're seeing what Indiana's doing, and now with Indiana and losing, a year there, yeah, they're absolutely going to be a team to watch. So it depends. And I think in the East, you're seeing the team say, yep, it's wide open. Let's take a shot and take a run at this. I think they're going to run it back. You're going to see the Hawks running it back with Trey. I doubt they're trading him now. The West is kind of what I want to focus on as this offseason progresses, because the West isn't wide open. I mean, you've got a bunch of elite teams and a bunch of damn good teams in here. If you're not guaranteed a top 8 team, and I'm going to say 8, if you're not guaranteed a top 8, I think it's safe and wise to, set yourself up for the future and future starting 26, 27. If you're trying to stay competitive, and this is what I'm afraid of the Kings doing, and we're going to see as the off season progresses, I would hate to see a team like the Kings say, we're going to try and stay competitive as we can, and we're going to make win now moves and not really focus on the future because, we just want to raise ticket prices or whatever the case. I'd be concerned and I'd be frustrated because this is not the year to do that, especially in the Western Conference with what's going on. So it depends. It varies from team to team. But I think the West is more likely to sell stock right now. And I think the East is more likely to buy stock.
Do you think that the Kings have what it takes right now to even make the play-in?
No.
No.
I don't.
So you think if the season started now, we would most likely finish the season on the outside looking in?
Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of that has to do with just the severe lack of identity. I think you're going to spend 25 games figuring out what kind of a team you want to be before you actually lock in. And there's a bunch of teams who are already established, who know their identities, who have already gotten better. And teams that even finish behind you, like San Antonio, who right now, if you put San Antonio against Sacramento, San Antonio is the better team. Even though they didn't finish ahead of Sacramento, they're the better team. And now Dallas Mavericks, who finished, just behind us in the standings, they have Cooper Flag. So, I don't think the Kings are a lock for the play-in by any stretch of the imagination right now.
Totally fair. Yeah, and I think, listen, the NBA is going to be crazy next year. And I think this is where we need to, you and I think, if we're talking freely on the pod here, we need to temper our expectations, because past couple of years we've been filled with expectations. We're like, oh, this is what winning's like. Oh, yay.
We're finals bound.
Yeah, like totally. Now we gotta get back to that mentality where we're like, yeah, we're winning 40 games this year. Let's go. Like, it's gonna be interesting to see what happens next year. And again, who knows what's gonna happen with injuries and stuff, right? Like, I think it's everything. The NBA is so volatile right now, especially with the way the schedule's set up and how many games these guys are running. And I think they do need to do something about whether how many games are played or the format of the playoffs. Because as fun as that finals was, obviously injuring notwithstanding, I think that, to watch these teams have to go through injured players along the way, injured teams along the way, it was not as fun. And the matchups that were the most fun were the teams that were healthy and going at it. So I just thought it was, it's something to think about, and it'll be interesting to see. I think the league's going to be completely unrecognizable in like 2 to 3 years, whether it's expansion or more rule changes or things like that to try and, counter some of this. Cause I think it's pretty alarming with the injuries and stuff like that too. You don't want to spend your whole season and going into the playoffs with half of the superstars that you were marketing all year long. So I just think it's,
Right.
well, it'll be interesting to see what comes out of it. But so far, it's been a crazy summer just to start. Just the first, normally these types of moves don't happen until a little bit later down the line, a little bit more spread out. But it's happening as if the trade deadline's tomorrow. So it's been really interesting to see a lot of these teams say, hey, we wanted to come up with a move before the draft and then plan a draft strategy around that trade. So it'll be interesting to see the Kings are doing it in reverse. We got the draft picks. Now let's see what we can do trade wise to fill out the roster. So it'll be interesting to see these next, few weeks, next couple months to see what kind of moves or news comes out about Sacramento and what Scott Perry wants to do. Now that Christie's, is the guy, how confident is the front office in him? Like, not Scott Perry, but like how long of a leash is Vivek gonna give him before he starts acting weird and asserting himself in ways that we don't need him to?
5 feet.
So it's so it's like I wonder how in unison are Scott and Doug too when building this roster together. I wonder how much say Doug had when picking Nique as well. So this is going to be things that I'm excited to hear over the next coming couple months.
Yeah, and I mean the next few weeks will be great, but I'm excited for June 30th when free agency opens up, because one thing for sure, if the Kings are interested in getting anybody when free agency opens up, you're going to need to do it pretty quick, because we just had this conversation about buying stock and selling stock. Well, the teams that are willing to buy stock right now are going to be doing it quick. And if the Kings are, one of those teams who feel like they want to buy stock in a certain player or a situation or whatever, they're going to have to do it pretty quick. So, especially in the point guard room, if that's the route they so choose to go with a Dennis Schroeder or a Russell Westbrook, for instance, then I think within the first few days, if not first few hours, I think you should start to see some rumblings. So I'm excited. I think if I had to make a guess, I think the Kings do get either a Russell Westbrook or a Dennis Schroeder. I think that is the safest bet right now based on reports that we've heard, based on speculation. If I had to just, make a crazy guess, and I'm going to say it's Russell Westbrook. I doubt it's going to happen, but the reason I would say it happens over Dennis is because I think they're going to want fans to still show up for basketball games in the Golden One Center, and a name like that is going to draw attention in Sacramento, and it's fun. I mean, you got, if you keep DeMar DeRozan, now you got DeMar DeRozan and Russell Westbrook. Like, that's pretty cool. On paper, that's pretty cool. Let's just rewind it like eight years, and we'll be chilling. But that's my hot take. I'm just going to say it's Russell Westbrook. Otherwise, we'll see, and we'll be talking about it next week.
Absolutely. So yeah, no, it'll be interesting to see who we bring on board, and hopefully we don't outbid ourselves. Hopefully, I think this is going to be interesting. Now we get to dissect Scott from the very beginning, because when before we started the pod, we got the Monty McNair experience from start to finish, but we never got to just like sit back and dissect it the way that we get to do now here. So this will be interesting to see how Perry reshapes and rebuilds this team. But I think he's been he's been very clear about his goal, and I want to buy into what he has to say. But it's just the overarching looming cloud that is the ownership of this team that you always are like, oh, these moves are great, and then behind the scenes we just have no idea what the heck is going on. So I'm hoping for the best, but well, my expectations are going to be tempered.
That's 100% fair.
Yeah. So any final thoughts before we head out here? I think we covered a lot of good stuff today.
I'm done talking. I'm kidding.
All right, y'all. So with that being said, this is episode 93 of the Behind the Back podcast. You can hit us up at behindthebackpod13@gmail.com. Please give us a like, subscribe, rate, review, and follow. And for all you guys watching on video right now, all of our links to our social medias are up above. For all you audio listeners, the links in the descriptions are down below. And we appreciate all the love and support that you guys give us each and every week. We look forward to growing with you. More stuff coming down the pipeline. We'll see what news comes our way, and we'll be ready to report on it when it happens. So with that being said, I'm Marcos Conagron. Beside me here, as always, is
Ben the Jet Rats.
All right, y'all. We love you. We will talk to you next week. Peace.
Peace.